For those born to the most noble, pure-blooded house of Black, their lives had a set route from the day they were born. They were but toy cars on a track carefully cut and crafted by Wilburga Black. She knew that her sons would use their exceptional intelligence to graduate Hogwarts top of their respective years, be the heads of social groups of other proud pureblood wizards, work in positions of power in the ministry, marry wealthy pure-blooded wives, and teach the same pattern to their children. But when toy cars have a brain of their own, it's important that the track be perfect, because even if one link is missing, they might veer off course. Perhaps Walburga did miss somewhere along the way, because Sirius most certainly wasn't following the track she had built for him. What could she have done? Her firstborn son would become the friend of muggles and mudbloods. Where on earth had he cultivated that defiance, that positive need to do exactly the opposite of whatever she had taught him? After all, hadn't she done everything that her mother had done before her? Hadn't she given up and do anything outside the path of a proper pureblood? It made her angry, positively furious, that after everything she had given up, that her own child couldn't do the same. She loathed herself for her mistake, though she had no idea where she could have made it. And she hated her son for being such that he could ruin everything she had worked for so long simply out of rebelliousness and the pursuit of his most vile desires. Her other son, Regulus, didn't defy her. He followed quietly and without complaint, obeying her every wish. In fact, Walburga couldn't have asked for any two different sons. Where Sirius was stubborn, loud, and wild, Regulus was compliant, quiet, and reserved. Where Sirius was always surrounded by friends, disgraceful though they may be, Regulus was always alone, having only the company of the house elf. On occasion, she even worried that with Regulus's passive behavior, he would not become the socialite that she had planned him to be. The boy had never been skilled at socialization, nor had he ever asserted his power over others. He distinctly lacked the domineering and aristocratic air that she had been trying to instill in her children since birth. It was with this woeful thought that she grimaced at the tapestry she had been studying and turned away to glance at the ornate grandfather clock. It was 10:45, and, she thought frustratedly, if her children didn't leave soon, they would miss the train, which would be painfully embarrassing, especially on Regulus's first day. She was about to shriek up the stairs to them to hurry up when she heard the distinct sounds of Sirius dashing down the stairs. The boy just didn't know how to carry himself with grace. Sure enough, he came crashing into the drawing room several seconds later, yelling over his shoulder at Regulus to hurry up. Sirius was 13, lean and rather tall for his age. He had dark, shoulder-length hair, tied back in a sloppy ponytail, and a rather handsome face with a strong chin and high cheekbones that were distinctive of the Black family. His robes were messy, and, judging from the wrinkled sleeve of his spare uniform peeking out from the side of his trunk, the contents were a disorderly mess. Walburga ground her teeth, knowing that they did not have time to neaten his appearance, but thinking of the judgmental stares of her friends in trepidation. "Mother, I'm ready," a second boy said, walking to the living room behind his brother. Walburga scanned his appearance critically before nodding once. At least he would not embarrass her today. He was 2 years younger than Sirius, skinny and rather lean, and not considerably tall in comparison to his brother, but at least his shorter hair was neatly combed and styled, and his robes looked immaculate and prim. His face had the same chin and high cheekbones that distinguished him as a Black, and his gray eyes, though similar in shape and color to his brother's, were calculating and cold, rather than wild and excited. "Step into the fire, you two, and try not to get ash on your robes. You shouldn't look like a vagabond on your first day," she said, giving Sirius a pointed look and holding out the flue powder to her children. Sirius rolled his eyes and, throwing down a handful of flue powder, jumped into the flames so that clouds of ash billowed up, coating his robes in soot. "Platform 9 3/4, he called clearly and disappeared. "Mother," Regulus asked, glancing at her white-knuckled grip around the silk pouch of flue powder. "Go on," she said, and allowed him to take a handful of flue powder and step into the flames after his brother. As Regulus stepped out of the grate onto the platform, his ears were immediately filled with the chatter and bustle of the busy station. Children and parents were exchanging hurried goodbyes, cats were meowing and hissing as people tripped over them in their haste, and owls were hooting their displeasure as their cages jostled through the crowd, balanced on large trunks. Regulus grinned broadly. This was his first time on the platform, but this time he would be boarding the train as well. "Move quickly, Regulus," Wilbur said behind him, and Regulus plunged into the chaos after his brother, who had already disappeared into the crowd. After several minutes of forcing his way across the platform, he made it to the train and, with a wave and a grin at his mother, boarded it. Still grinning, he made his way down the train to find his brother. As he reached the compartment, he opened the door to see 4 boys already laughing and talking animatedly. The second he stepped in, however, they all fell silent and stared questioningly at him. Regulus said, shifting his feet awkwardly. "Go away," Sirius said. "Know where you're not wanted." Regulus's face fell and he looked at his feet. "Oh, come on, Padfoot," one of the boys said. "Don't be mean." Sirius rolled his eyes. "There's no way I'm going to let him sit with us." He turned to glare on Regulus. "No, go find your own friends and stop bothering me and mine." Regulus flushed, but didn't say anything as he turned and walked out of the compartment. He found an empty one in the next car and sat down by the window, not bothering to put his trunk in the luggage rack. He spent the rest of the ride staring dejectedly out the window, most of his enthusiasm gone. By the time the train came to a stop, he had fallen asleep, his face plastered to the window. He woke with a jolt as the train's whistle sounded and children began moving noisily from their compartments onto the Hogsmeade platform. He stood up, slightly disorientated from sleep, and, grabbing the handle of his trunk, pulled it after him into the mass of students. Coming out onto the dark platform, he saw the students dispersing, to a long line of horses, and only the smallest and youngest to the figure of the largest member had ever seen. "First years over here, first years," the huge man was calling in a loud, booming voice that could be heard even over the chatter of the students. Regulus moved hurriedly through the crowd, barely managing to avoid being trampled by a gaggle of ears. By the time he finally came to a halt in front of the man, panting and leaning against his trunk, all the other first years were already gathered there. "I'm Rubeus Hagrid, and I'll be taking you folks up to the castle on the boats," the man said, surveying the group of first years. "Right, this way, then." Regulus followed Hagrid as he led them to the docks, and he and the other first years boarded the boats. He supposed they must be enchanted to hold immense weight, because even with Hagrid alone in the boat, no normal boat that size could hold a man so big. The boats drifted across the lake, magically directed toward the castle. The still night air barely ruffled the surface of the lake, and the sky was reflected perfectly in the dark water. This beautiful scene, however, was barely noticed by the steers, who all seemed to be too nervous to appreciate the views. Regulus was not an exception. He fidgeted nervously in the boat, staring at the castle, feeling excitement and anxiety raging in the pit of his stomach. In only a few minutes he would be sorted into a house, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, or Gryffindor, and only one was an acceptable result. His brother had been sorted into Gryffindor and become the first member of the Black family tree to be sorted into any house outside of Slytherin. Though he had never been much like his brother, now, with the imminent prospect of the sorting, he was terrified that he would be placed in the house most despised by his family. Then there was Hufflepuff. No respectable pureblood was ever a Hufflepuff. It would be a disgrace to him and his family. No one would take him seriously from then onward if he was sorted into that house. Ravenclaw, he supposed, wouldn't be so bad, but it still wasn't Slytherin, and Slytherin was the only house he actually wanted to be in. Even under these incessant thoughts and fears, there was also excitement. He was finally going to Hogwarts. He had been looking forward to this his entire life. He would see the school he had read so much about. He would learn magic that he could never have dreamed of. And he would finally be around peers and make friends like his brother had. He imagined visiting friends' houses over the holidays. He imagined having conversations over breakfast about Quidditch and classes. They would have mutual enemies, probably Gryffindors, that they would play pranks on, and they would walk to all their classes together, discussing school gossip. Of course, he would choose better friends than Sirius, no blood traitors or filth, and they wouldn't get in so much trouble. But they would be just as close and would have just as much fun. He grinned and looked around. Which one of these people would become his friends? Who would he be spending the 7 years of his Hogwarts experience with? In one boat to his left were a disheveled-looking red-headed boy, probably a Weasley, a girl with very frizzy black hair whose mouth was hanging open comically, and a boy, taller than most of the other first years, with shaggy brown hair and eyes the size and shape of galleons as he stared up at the castle. He doubted any of them would be acceptable candidates to his parents, so he continued to study the other first years. A little further away was another group of students, all of whom looked well-groomed and sat with perfect posture and indifferent expressions on their faces. Regulus thought they looked vaguely familiar and supposed they were the pureblood of the types his mother would approve of, though none of them looked particularly friendly. "Please get out of your boats and follow me into the castle," said a stern-faced woman standing on the dock. She had brown hair pulled back in a tight bun, the kind his mother sometimes wore. In an orderly fashion, she added, as the students began to climb noisily out of their boats. Regulus hadn't even noticed that they had reached the shore, lost as he was in his own thoughts, so he had jumped when the woman had spoken, standing only a few meters away. Feeling slightly disorientated, he climbed clumsily out of his boat, earning him disdainful looks from the other pureblood students, whom he had noticed earlier. He grimaced before setting his face into a mask of calm and walking stiffly after the stern-faced woman.